Welcome to Season 2, Episode 5 of the podcast, Ghosts, Demons, and Murder, Oh My. My name is Hayden Crook, and I will be your host for today's episode on the case of Joshua Maddox. Source 1 is Strange Outdoors. It says Joshua Vernon Maddox disappeared May 8th, 2008, in Woodland Park, Colorado. The body was found August 7th, 2015. And then this article was revised, updated in October of 2023. So pretty recent. It says on May 8th, 2008, Joshua or Josh Maddox, 18, left his parents' house for a short walk nearby. He was a nature lover, so this was nothing unusual, but he was never seen alive again. 7 years later, in August 2015, less than a mile from Josh's home, property developer Chuck Murphy was demolishing an old wood cabin to make way for 32 new family homes. The cabin hadn't been used in years, and the inside was dirty, damp, filled with rotten timbers, and strewn with garbage. Work began to demolish the chimney inside the cabin, and to the surprise of the demolition team, crammed inside the brickwork was a mummified body, which later was confirmed as Josh. His body was naked apart from a thin shirt, and his clothes were neatly stacked inside the cabin. What happened to Josh? Did he climb into the chimney in the cabin? Was he forced in by a person or persons unknown? The story of Josh Maddox continues to stir debate amongst armchair detectives. Who was Joshua Maddox? Joshua Maddox was born on March 9th, 1990, and lived in Woodland Park, a town of around 8,000 people in the Pike National Forest, Teller County, Colorado. His parents were divorced, and Josh lived with his father, Mike, and two sisters, Kate and Ruth. He was long haired, 6 feet tall, blonde haired, and weighed around 150 pounds. He had a carefree attitude to life, loved music, and spent much of his free time writing or playing the guitar. At school, he was a bright student and was seemingly well liked. 2 years before Josh's disappearance, on June 1st, 2006, a week before his high school graduation, his older brother Zachary, 18, committed suicide after suffering from severe depression. Side note, real quick, um, I took at a couple or like a job or two ago, um, I did like mental health training, and just to put it out there, a lot the updated verbiage instead of saying committed suicide because it sounds like committed is like you did something wrong, it was a sin, a crime. People usually prefer to say completed, or just another word instead of committed because the word committed has certain contexts attached to it. It would just make it sound like a bad thing. It's a sad thing. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there. Mike Maddox said, I buried his older brother 2 years before, and it was so difficult on Josh. When his brother died, it pushed him over the edge. It was a big shock for the family and a big shock for Josh. He thought highly of his older brother. Despite this, Josh had been doing well and was now happy with his life. The disappearance of Josh Maddox. On May 8th, 2008, Josh left the house, telling his sister Kate he was going for a walk. He often went hiking alone, so when his sister saw him at the home before he left, she thought little of it. But when he failed to return later that evening, the family became worried. On May 13th, 5 days after he disappeared, his father Mike called the police to report Josh missing. Mike said, I got up one morning and Josh was there, and then he never came home. The next day, he still didn't come home. I called his friends, but nobody had seen him. Nobody knew where he was. The search for Josh. The authorities, friends, and family scoured the neighborhood and nearby Parkland area where Josh may have decided to go walking. After months of searching, nothing had been uncovered and hopes faded. Josh's sister Kate hoped he had left town to go and play music or start a different life. She wrote of her brother's disappearance. Since Josh was 18, it has been reasonable to assume he may have decided to leave town to start a new life. As one of his two older sisters, I have always believed this was the case. I've expected Josh to return home to my father's house at any time with a wife and small children so that they can meet their grandparents and two aunts. Josh has always been known for his musical and literary talent, so maybe we would find him playing music with a band on tour or catching him writing successful novels under a pen name so that he could keep his preferred lifestyle of solitude in the woods. The police had no reason to suspect any foul play and so listed him as a missing person. The body in the chimney. Chuck Murphy's cabin where Josh Maddox's corpse was discovered in August 2015. Okay, there's a picture. So, I'm trying to describe it. So, based off the picture, I can't tell. There's another building next to it that got demolished, so I'm not sure if that was like the insides of the cabin or if there was another building next to it. But it's a very remote, woodsy area. Kind of looks like the area I grew up in back home. Yeah, it's a timber. It's like the thick logs, like a more retro built cabin, kind of like you see in the movies, I guess, and stuff. It's like the big timber logs, and it looks nice. But like the article said, it'd been vacant for years. In 2015, Chuck Murphy, 80, a builder from Colorado Springs, was demolishing his old wood cabin on Meadowlark Lane in a large area of land surrounded by tall pines. Chuck had initially purchased the cabin in the 1950s. It was formerly the homestead of Thunderhead Ranch on Rampart Range Road on Woodland Park's north side. It was an infamous dining, drinking, and gambling complex owned by Big Bert Bergstrom in the 1930s to 1950s. He'd come to America from Sweden in 1912 and run the Thunderhead Inn as a dining and drinking establishment after the end of Prohibition. He also used the ranch as an illegal gambling and prostitution den, and the FBI arrested him. In a subsequent trial, the jury found him not guilty. The cabin hadn't been used for a decade and had fallen into disrepair. Chuck had decided to demolish the cabin to make way for property development, and in August 2015, demolition work started. Chuck's brother had lived in the cabin until 2005, but since moving out, it had become a storage facility and rarely visited. Animals had been a problem. There was a noticeable stench when Chuck came to the cabin on August 7th. As the workers dismantled the chimney, one of the two in the cabin, using an excavator, and had reached the interior. Chuck made the horrific discovery of the body of a young man cramped into a fetal position with his legs above his head. He called the police, who arrived with the county coroner, who later, with the help of dental records, positively identified the body to be that of the missing man, Joshua Maddox. The Maddox family was shocked by the news of the discovery of Josh's body. His sister Kate said, "The situation doesn't make any sense at all. We were really expecting him to be anywhere else in the world, and he was actually very close. The only thing we can figure is he was being an 18-year-old kid checking out a cabin. It had already been abandoned for a long time, and a horrible accident happened." The cabin was only 2 blocks from the Maddox family home, yet the searchers for Josh had overlooked the building. There was no sign of life and no reason to check a chimney there. Chuck Murphy, the cabin owner himself, had rarely visited. However, on the occasions he had to check in, he had not noticed anything unusual about the property, like the smell of a decaying corpse. Since the cabin stood centrally in a large plot of land surrounded by tall pines, around 50 feet from the road, police suggested that with no adjacent homes, if Josh had cried for help, no one would have been able to hear him regardless. Further investigation into Josh's death. The Teller County coroner, Al Bourne, did an autopsy and found no evidence of any drugs in Josh's remains. He said the hard tissue showed no signs of trauma. There was no broken bones, no knife marks, there were no bullet holes. There are so far no answers to a number of things. It is very confusing. It was not an instant death. How he died is only a matter of speculation, but we know he did not starve to death because that takes many weeks. So then you go down the chain and you have dehydration, which can take just a few days. And the other thing would be hypothermia, which would take a day or two. We have no evidence to say which one came first. On September 28th, 2015, Bourne made a ruling of accidental death. He speculated that Josh had climbed into the chimney and become stuck in the brickwork. Bourne stated that Josh's position in the chimney appeared to have been a voluntary act to gain access. He concluded the most likely cause of death was hypothermia, as the temperature around the time of his disappearance between May 8th and May 10th, 2008 had dropped to the high 20s. Discrepancies in the coroner's report. Many locals had issues with the coroner's report, including the family. Chuck questioned the coroner's conclusion of accidental death as the chimney had been built 20 years before. During its construction, it was fitted with a thick wire mesh hung from steel hooks to keep animal and debris from becoming lodged inside the chimney or from entering the cabin itself. Murphy said it was a heavy wire grate, a wire mesh. I installed it across the chimney about one row of bricks from the top. We didn't want trouble with raccoons and things getting into the chimney. Bourne thought the grate could have been rushed or corroded and stated, "Nobody saw the metal mesh. We didn't see it in any of our photos. It may have disappeared." Murphy responded that all metalwork had been collected and taken for scrap during the demolition. This explained why the coroner did not identify the mesh, as it wasn't anywhere near the chimney. They were just gathering up all the steel, angle iron, and things as part of the demolition, Murphy said. They had no idea the mesh had any significance. Conceding to Murphy, Bourne reopened the case 3 days after his initial conclusion. It was not only the rebar that caused doubt about the original autopsy. For example, a large wooden breakfast bar that had been torn from a wall in the kitchen and dragged over to block the chimney from inside the cabin raised further suspicions. If the breakfast bar had been torn from the wall, then who had done it and why? Josh's body had also been found in a fetal position, with his legs above his head and disjointed from his torso. He would have had to have entered the chimney head first to get into such a position. This was a somewhat unusual position, and Bourne had earlier commented that he thought it would have taken two people to position him in such a fashion. What was even stranger was that when Josh's body had been found, he was only wearing a thin thermal shirt, and his clothes had actually been found inside the cabin, folded up next to the fireplace. Bourne said of this evidence, "This one really taxed our brains. We found his clothing just outside the firebox. He only had it on a thermal t-shirt. We don't know why he took his clothes off, took his shoes and socks off, and why he went outside, climbed on the roof and went down the chimney. It was not linear thinking." The revised autopsy report said that the cause of death was accidental death, murder, or undetermined causes. Bourne said, "We've come up with the most plausible explanation, and it will remain an accident. He did come down the chimney. That's our conclusion." Murphy said there's no way that guy crawled inside the chimney with that steel webbing. He didn't come down the chimney, and he remained convinced that Josh's death had been no accident, adding, "He was only wearing his thermal shirt, no pants, no socks or shoes. No shoes or socks." Murphy said it was ridiculous to think the teen stripped down to just his shirt, climbed up on the roof and then the chimney, and slid down knowing he'd be trapped. Theories on the Josh Maddox death and the Andy Newman link. The police received several anonymous tip-offs suggesting leads and naming suspects that had bragged of killing Josh. One such was now incarcerated in a Texas jail and had previous time in Seattle and Portland prisons with a long history of violent crime. One tip-off had informed the police that this man had been seen with Josh. When speaking of the man, Al Bourne said, "They can't give me times and specifics, and we can't generate stuff that goes back 7 years." Bourne also doubted the man would have been able to put Josh in the chimney alone. In 2015, a post on Reddit gave a name to the suspect just mentioned. The post said, "I went to high school with this skinny, dorky hippie named Andy who played guitar in a band. I was never good friends with him or anything, but a year or so after I graduated, one of my good friends, Josh, started hanging out with him and then went missing. Turns out that in addition to becoming a lot scarier looking, Andy had indeed headed down to New Mexico where he found himself shooting the shit with the caretaker of a disabled guy and got invited over to their apartment. Caretaker gets in the shower, and when he comes back out, the disabled guy is stabbed to death and Andy's gone. When Andy got arrested, he also claimed to have killed a woman in Teos and stuffed her body in a barrel. The cops had indeed found a woman stuffed in a barrel in Teos, but apparently had somebody in custody for it. Already had somebody in custody for it and decided to stick with that guy instead. Years later, I found out that the caretaker had died in a bar fight, and without him, the cops didn't have much in the way of evidence somehow. So that case against Andy was dropped too. Several of us went to the cops saying, "Yo, Josh, who went missing, was last seen with Andy, who's a murderer. Maybe you should check that out." Despite a fair amount of persist or pestering, nothing ever really came of it, and by nothing, I mean that the police mostly didn't even return our calls, and once accidentally canceled the bulletin on Josh because he's alive and well and living in the next town over. He wasn't. He was actually in the chimney of an abandoned cabin like 2 blocks from his parents' house. The coroner said the body had been there for about 7 years and ruled the death accidental, concluding that Josh had probably climbed down the chimney in an attempt to break into the house and gotten stuck, which, given the age of the corpse, doesn't seem overly ridiculous. Except for the fact that in addition to Josh having last been seen with Andy immediately before his stabbing spree, people called in to report having heard rumors that Andy was bragging about having put Josh in a hole. Somebody had ripped a heavy bar off the wall in the kitchen and propped it against the fireplace. Or the fact that Josh's stuff was already inside the cabin, meaning A, he'd already broken in and would have had to lock himself out to have to go for the chimney, and B, he might have noticed that either the flue or the big bar would have prevented him from getting in through the fireplace. Or the fact that when he was found, Josh's knees were above his head, which sounds to me like he would have had to go in head first. Disclaimer, not an expert at fucking all. Or maybe the fact that Josh was barefoot and naked from the waist down. This is just my opinion, but I don't care who you are. You don't try to climb headfirst into a chimney via a hole rusted through a metal grate with your dick hanging out. As far as I can tell, nobody even bothered to call Andy to ask if he knew anything. By the way, from what I hear, Andy's still out and about doing his thing when he's not in the mental hospital. All I'm saying is, I wish they had done some police shit, open an investigation, try to track down some leads, interview some of the folks who've been calling in tips for the last 7 years, maybe check for some semen or something. I don't know. Don't just say accidental, dust off your hands, and call it a day. Andy's full name was Andrew Richard Newman. He was arrested on suspicion of a fatal stabbing in New Mexico and is currently serving time. Conclusions on the case. Chuck Murphy, the cabin owner, said it's a real conundrum, a tragic, terrible story. All I know is he did not go down that chimney. He got in the fireplace and went up. But why? I think it will remain a mystery, one of those sad stories. Source 2 is grunge. Let's see. Okay, it's just talking about the brother um, completing suicide and that Josh was upset by it, but he moved on. He didn't have a history of mental illness. Um, just trying to see. Okay, it was just a lot of repeat. I don't know why I included it, but yeah, basically the cabin owner, Chuck Murphy, believed it was an accident, or it wasn't an accident. He believes there was foul play or just something um, going on with that. Huffington Post is source 3. Let's see. The situation doesn't make any sense at all, Maddox's older sister, Kate Maddox, told the Huffington Post. We were really expecting him to be anywhere in the world, and he was actually very close. Let's see. We had hopes of him being alive, and I feel like in a sense he continued to live on with us because we had so many dreams of what he could possibly be doing, Kate Maddox said. The young man's sister described him as creative and intelligent. His IQ was off the charts, she said. He spent most of his time writing fictional stories and playing music. He had an interesting and unique sense of style. People in high school knew him for being that awesome kid who wore a top hat and brought a briefcase to school instead of a backpack. There was a subtle sophistication about him that made him interesting and a standout. And then there's just a quote from Murphy saying, occasionally they go check the cabin. There were mice and chipmunks and raccoons, and that he added it smelt bad in there, and that he never really was in there. um, except to tear down. They didn't go back in there until they were going to tear it down. It was ruled accidental, and then let's see. And then nobody could hear him scream for help because of the location. And sounds or cries of help would have been muffled because of the chimney. That's what Al Bourne, the coroner, said. Let's see. Kate Maddox declined to discuss her brother's suicide, the older brother's suicide. She didn't want to talk about it with the Huffington Post. I can't imagine the pain that family went through, Bourne told HuffPost. The first one, they knew where that person is and could bring closure. For the second, there was 7 years before they could bring closure. The interim had to be brutal. Closure in Josh Maddox's case, his sister said, is bittersweet. The last 7 years have been really difficult and painful, Kate Maddox said. But given the strange circumstances, it's kind of a miracle that we're having the opportunity now to give him the proper service and burial he deserves. He's not lost anymore. This isn't how we wanted him to come home, but he has come home, and that's important. That's about it. This was a shorter one. I was on Facebook a couple weeks ago and I saw an article pop up about this story and I went and researched it and I was like, this is interesting. I want to cover this. I hadn't heard of this before. So, what are your theories? Let me know in the comments. You can comment on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you listen, wherever you're subscribed. So, here's my theory. Um, Maybe that Andy guy. Okay, but what I think is okay, I don't know because they didn't say anything about the neck, but hold on. I need a water break real quick. Hold on. I'm thinking maybe Andy dared him to like climb down the chimney or something, and he maybe chickened out or something last minute, and maybe Andy pushed him, and that's why he went down the chimney head for. I don't know. I'm thinking he had to have been pushed though. There's no way he would have crawled down head first. That just doesn't make sense. Um, and maybe Andy did move that bar, whatever piece of furniture. Maybe he moved it in front of the fireplace inside the house, maybe trying to get this Josh boy to do a dare. Say, I bet you can't climb down like make it down the chimney. And maybe they went up on the roof and Josh chickened out. And then they said Andy was mentally unstable. So maybe he got pissed off or they had an altercation and he pushed Josh. And that's when he went down the chimney and was like that and got stuck. And then Andy just left him there. I don't know. That's my theory, though. I'm gonna go with it. That's my final theory is that Andy guy was there. They maybe there was a dare or they tried to make it into a game. Andy pushed that piece of furniture in front of the chimney, tried to make it more challenging. Not sure really what happened, but he got upset with Josh and pushed him down the chimney. It didn't say anything about a broken neck either, so I don't know, but I honestly feel like someone pushed Josh and Andy makes the most sense based off the research that I have here. So that's my final verdict that Andy pushed Josh down the chimney. And that's what happened, and he left him there. That's my theory. Let me know what you think in the comments. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Ghosts, Demons, and Murder Oh My. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast so you can get all the updates, information, and content that will be uploaded. Thank you for the support and for listening to my podcast. As always, I can be reached via email at haydencrook8@gmail.com.